Welcome to Grace Story Podcast. We're here to connect you with education, resources, and community that equip you for the journey of restoration. I'm your host, Nate Davison, and I want to thank you personally for joining us on this episode where we're going to be talking about burnout. Now, before we do that, I want you to head on over to the GraceStoryMinistries.com webpage, and I want you to click the subscribe button. When you do that, you join other Grace Story community members, and you gain exclusive access to our Grace Story community page on Facebook. Over there, there's a wide range of topics from many different experts and instructors, and that's all archived where you can go back and view it more than once. And you can also interact on there. You can be as active as you want to be and join others in their journey of restoration as well. So head on over to GraceStoryMinistries.com and click subscribe. Now today we have Zach Clark with us, and beginning about at 20 years of age, Zach's expertise and skills were honed as a development consultant serving hundreds of Christian schools, churches, and nonprofit ministry organizations around the country. From 2006 to 2013, Zach served as Director of Advancement at Westminster Christian Academy, St. Louis. That's one of our nation's largest independent Christian schools. And while he was there, he built and supported a highly effective team. He was responsible for providing leadership to the overall advancement efforts of the school. And this included developing a $70 million plan and following it through to support the vision and mission of Westminster. Now, I've experienced Zach's teaching at a boot camp that our group, our Grace Story Ministry board went to. And Zach, he has a dynamic and energetic teaching style that makes him very much sought after as a public speaker. He was among the first members of the John Maxwell team. That's the world's leading leadership development organization. And he is a John Maxwell certified coach, trainer, and speaker. In 2013, Zach founded Development and Leadership Coaching, LLC, a ministry-based company focused on serving leaders of faith-based nonprofit organizations, and that includes Grace Story Ministries. Beginning with one client in 2013, the company has now served over 100 organizations across North America, most with an annual operating budget of less than $1 million. So Zach is coming to us with expertise. He has a lot going on. He's a very busy man, and I think you're going to enjoy what he has to say about burnout. So Zach, I want to first thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast episode we have for today. So thank you so much. And I just want to jump right in and find out, why is this topic important to you?
Well, it's my pleasure for being here. Nate, thank you so much, and really glad to be able to dive into a topic that I'm passionate about. I'd say it's important to me because I'm a person that, if I look back over my life, has had to really learn some things the hard way. You know, I've been given some incredible opportunities starting at a very young age to learn and grow, but at the same time I've faced some challenges and made a lot of mistakes and failed in a lot of ways, as many of us have. And so I would say that this topic's profoundly important to me because burnout has been a pattern in my life that I can see now when I look back. I'm 43 years old now. I can look back all the way into my late teens and see sort of a reoccurring pattern even over a certain cycle of years. And I think it's a pattern in many others' lives as well, particularly those with a drive to make a difference or to succeed, or people with a drive to do a really excellent job, whether that's in their work or in their marriage or in their family. You know, people who sort of bring a performance mentality to life, or folks that just face carry very significant responsibilities. So I'm passionate about it because, unfortunately, it's been a pattern for me. So that's why it's of interest to me. And I jumped at the chance to try to talk about the things that I've learned and continue to learn and grow in.
So let's look a little bit deeper there. You're talking about a pattern going way back to your teenage years. You're still a young man, very driven. Can you tell us more about your personal experience with burnout and what that pattern looked like, maybe?
Yeah, well, I think it's helpful to keep in mind as we talk about all this too, that burnout is just a word. So a lot of times it's a word that people might use to just describe emotions that they're feeling or processing. Other times it might be a word that's really describing a certain set of symptoms and behaviors and challenges. So for me, if I look back on my life, yeah, I had a was in a family where we were always busy. We were outdoors, hunting, fishing. We raised Labrador retrievers. My dad owned his own business. Was a very hard worker. So we had a very, very strong work ethic to how we lived life, and so there was a lot of value in that. For me, though, where it really started showing up and becoming a pattern was sort of an unhealthy outcome or unhealthy side of some of my strengths. So I was a musician, started playing piano at 9 years old, ultimately went to college to study music, and went on academic and music scholarships. So I started very young playing piano and studying music for hours at a time. And by the time I went to college, I was spending 5 hours on the bench just in practice. My parents let me move my piano into my bedroom, padded my walls so I could stay up till midnight practicing and preparing.
And that's
and that
5 hours a day?
5 hours a day practice.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was before going to college. And I was not a very pleasant person to be around if I did not get my 5 hours in. And, that was, again, that's a strength, a giftedness maybe, and a drive that was there. Went into college, though, and what I found over time was, and in college, I was spending 5 hours in practice. That was just practice. So I was often on the bench, performing or supporting other musicians, 10 hours a day. That was like work. That's not just in classes either. So I pretty much closed the practice rooms down, every midnight. And
it sounds like you're running out of hours in the day right there.
Right.
I'm trying to add them up.
Crazy. Yeah, you think about classes and then being on the practicing, and then late nights, and musician life, shutting down the practice rooms at midnight, going off into a club or a bar or a coffee shop, play until 2 a.m. And yeah, and to me, that was just sort of what it looked like to be a musician, be driven. So what began, it took me years to kind of understand this, but what we began at that time was like, okay, I'm doing what I think I'm supposed to be doing, that I've been working and preparing for all my life, and yet I feel pretty miserable, right? And the joy of it just kind of over time, just got more and more problematic. And it wasn't so much just the work of it, though. It was a lot of other unhealthy things that were patterns that were happening in my life. So I can actually see, this cycle. From there, I went to work with my dad. Similar, it was really hard work. So it's almost like a 5 to 7 year cycle where I feel like that has crept into my life. But it wasn't really until the past 7 years, I would say, cycle, where I've identified that and learned how to recover from it and how to avoid it to a great deal as well. So.
And I know we're going to talk in a minute about, some of those things that you found that have helped you, but maybe what was one of the most unexpected challenges of your time in these cycles, and how were you able to recognize that and maybe overcome it, if that makes sense?
Sure. Well, I think that probably the most challenging thing is this nagging feeling of I'm doing something productive, or I'm doing something meaningful. I'm even doing something I chose to do, a work that I chose to do, or that I'm passionate about, and yet there's no joy in it. Feeling exhausted all of the time, feeling like something's just not quite right. And so to be there in that state, I think is a pretty bad place when you start feeling that, because just identifying the emotions of it and the symptoms, if you will, just can lead to confusion. So I think that's what it looked like over all those cycles, is like I know that I'm not feeling good in so many ways. I know that I don't like many of the choices that I'm making. I know that many, like Paul, I find in me the very one who wants to do good, that I'm doing these things that I do not want to do, behaviors and things like that. But I'm confused. I don't understand what's going on in the situation. I just feel like I'm just, this is what it takes to do this. And I'm not really identifying even what's going on in those cycles.
And how did that affect your family and your friends? Because you're not going through this alone. You still have people that you're connected with. How did that affect them?
Mm-hmm. I think I think that the common threads, I haven't thought about that in a while, other than just more recent in our marriage, Paula and I, and our family. I would say that it shows up in several ways that might be helpful to others. That they would feel very unsettled because I seem to be unsettled. I seem to be working hard, doing a lot, but all over the place might be a good way to, just like all over the place. Like you're suddenly talking about changing total directions in your life, or how you're just not, okay or feeling happy. Simple ways to describe it is that my ability to love well is compromised because I don't feel the energy or the stability in my own heart and mind to do that. I think it affects others because I'm failing to keep promises, whether it's to myself or to others. I can't do that, or I know I said I would do that, but I can't. I don't feel like I can do that, or don't have the energy to that, or I don't have the time for that. In those situations would feel very hopeless, and hopeless people create hopelessness around them. They're not pleasant to be around. There's no optimism. There's no hope. So those are a few things, I think.
So
yeah.
I want to go back to something you said, and listening to you, it can be hard to identify whether you're burnt out or just really busy, because you're a very busy individual. You've got a lot going on. You're running your business. You have multiple clients. You're balancing things, using assistants to help you with that as well. So how do I recognize if I'm burnt out or just busy?
Yeah, I love that question. In fact, I was just talking recently with Paula, my wife, about this, just saying, gosh, I'm always going to be driven. I'm always going to be busy. There's, again, strengths in how God's created me there. But then there's these collateral negative impacts of that if I'm not really wise and humble. So we were just talking about this recently. I think, first of all, burnout, it's important to recognize, again, it could just be a word that people are using to describe how they're feeling at any state. Sort of like if someone says, I feel depressed. There's a difference between someone saying they feel depressed and someone that's deep politically, chemically way off base. So Mayo Clinic has some pretty clear definitions of burnout that I think are helpful. And I'm not a doctor or expert by any means. I could just talk about my own practices and experiences. But they point out things like, are you feeling cynical or critical all the time or at work? Do you drag yourself to your work or your volunteerism or your time with family? Do you drag yourself to it, have trouble getting started? To me, it starts feeling like you're winding a jack-in-the-box up, more and more every day. Are you irritable, impatient, lacking energy, lacking any satisfaction? Are you just disillusioned? Some of what I'm describing, that's a good word for it, just disillusioned. For me, it's like everything just starts feeling very pointless. You can't see the good things. And again, some of these things, if you think about it, go hand in hand with what can become real depression as well. Are you using food or alcohol or drugs to feel better? Do you have like weird complaints, headaches? I had migraines quite a bit. I actually had a significant physical infection that I had to have surgery for multiple times. That was just completely unexplainable and pretty frightening. So those are all sort of, I think, very helpful ways that all of us could relate to, but if that's become the norm, that really, you really may be in sort of this chemical burnout state. So your question to specifically though, I love like, well, what's the difference? And I think the difference is that sense of what I'm experiencing at a heart level, that if I'm honest with myself, I'm not loving well. I'm feeling very hopeless. Dread is a good word too. I feel like if I dig down in my heart today to be ready for this interview with you, and my fear is that there's nothing there, I'm going to reach in the well and the well's dry. That's burnout, right? And that didn't happen today, thankfully. I'm delighted to be talking with you. But man, when if I'm in that place, there's a dread and a fear that I'm going to reach down and nothing's going to be there because it's all literally burnt out. Now, busy, I think that's intensity. There's a lot going on. Overwhelm can certainly creep in, but you go, okay, I'm overwhelmed. How do I manage that? I could be busy because my priorities are out of whack, but I could be busy because my priorities are perfectly in alignment and there's an intensity required. The demands are intense, but I'm focused. I'm making intentional decisions. I think that's the difference there. So busy, I kind of think about like busy can be a result of good choices or and good alignment of priorities or not. And then, but burnout, that's moved from busy to this constant state where you're just, and again, I think it's a good way to think about a well. Like I keep bringing up well from the water and now the wells run dry.
One thing I'm hearing reoccurring that must probably take place is self-reflection. Making time for self-reflection. It seems like you could go easily from busy to burnt out and not even know it if you don't set aside. That's something I'm working on personally, is setting aside self-reflection time. It seems like a waste of time as you're sitting there seemingly doing nothing, but just reflecting back on the last day, hour, week. Where was I? Where am I? What are my goals? Have you had times like those where you set back in those cycles? You're talking about the cycles, the 7-year cycles. Was it a time of self-reflection that made you recognize that? Or was it someone else coming into your life that was like, hey, you need X, Y, and Z I'm seeing. What was it that made you recognize that with each cycle?
Unfortunately, in my case, I think it usually led to a crisis point. So if I were to continue to live in those cycles, what I would be doing at some point would be hitting a wall.
Wow.
And that wall would either be, I can no longer do this anymore, right? This work or this friendship or this job or whatever. And so I need to change. Or it could be I hit a wall because I'm literally sick and have some sort of debilitating illness for a while. It could be hitting a wall in that I've failed too many times in a relationship and hurt a friend or hurt a family member, and they're calling me out on that as well. So I think that's the real, unfortunately, it took that was sort of the way to begin to identify the patterns. Like, why do I keep hitting this wall that then results in damage or failing or shame on my part or discouragement or hurt for others or just wanting to be done. I think when someone who's intelligent does things they know are not helpful to themselves or others, that's the time for reflection. To say, because people can't just tell you why you're doing it. You have to think that through. So that's, I think, where unfortunately, if those cycles continued in my life, that's what that would look like. So the question became for me, how do you recover from that? And then how do I avoid that in the future without losing, I think, which is a silly fear that I had, but it's like, but I don't want to stop being me, Is there nothing good in me, right? Do I really have to give up all these things? Those were all emotions that I kind of had to think through.
So one thing I want to kind of clarify, and the question I have is burnout unavoidable? And if not, is it just something that's going to happen in my life? If it is avoidable, what can I put up in my life to kind of not get there? Because you talk about, hey, you know, in my life, it reached this crisis point seemingly unavoidable. But then, you know, you also say, I got to this point in my life where now I'm not just recovering, but I'm avoiding it. So how do I avoid it? Or is it unavoidable? I guess is my question.
I absolutely believe it's unavoidable. I do think that there are seasons of profound challenge that will come in life. Okay. Your ability to respond to those and navigate those doesn't always have to result in burnout or hitting that kind of wall. Again, I think we're talking about a continuum, sort of a journey where I start out busy and everything's great and exciting and there's all this adrenaline, but then I keep trying to live there and keep going and going and going and going and going. So I think avoiding is sort of identifying when those unhealthy patterns are starting to take place. How to avoid it, if that's what you're asking.
Sure.
Yeah, how to avoid it for me means that I try to quickly identify where are there undone things in my life. I really believe that deep down, once you've, even if you haven't consciously identified, when deep down you know there is something I'm supposed to do for my job or do in my family or do in my marriage, because it's true and it's right, and you avoid doing that, it's left undone, that I think is a beginning of sort of a cycle that can really be dangerous. So you avoid, I think, we could do a whole interview just on avoiding burnout, but I think that number one, I try to see where am I missing promises to myself? Where is work or choices being undone? That, I can so easily self-deceive myself, and that, well, I'll do that tomorrow. I'll this. And then ultimately you have to have systems. That you just can't think. It's not just reflection. Reflection's part of your system. You can't think yourself out of this problem because you didn't think yourself into the problem. You did yourself into it, right? You took action constantly. And so systems, what I would call systems for success, there's disciplines, rhythms. Some people will say to me, wow, I really admire how disciplined you are about some of these things. And I always share with them, I appreciate you saying that. I personally don't feel inside like a disciplined person. I don't feel like an organized person. I don't feel like a person that's very structured in how he uses his time. But what I will say is that I've gotten really, really good at a lot of tricks for myself that outside of me probably do look like discipline. Tricks for managing my energy, managing my schedule, tricks for that reflection time, writing and thinking, and then things that create energy as well. So
one thing I've learned during this this time of quarantine and, reaching out on social media or interacting with people on Zoom, there's been a lot of time to just talk to people. And I'm realizing a lot these days that people are very, very weird along with me. Like the things that I thought were weird about myself, everyone is experiencing those same things and dealing with them in their own way.
Right.
And it sounds like that's kind of what you're saying. Hey, I look on the outside like X, Y, and Z, but it's been a lot of work to get to a point where I have framework and a guide for myself so I don't fall back into traps that I have had reoccurring through my entire life.
Yes, yes. And the first one for me, I think, relates to recovery. Because remember, I said, I think, how do you avoid it? And then how do you recover? And recovery is a part of the system, part of avoiding it, part of, coming out of it. And what I mean by recovery in this sense is that the simplest way for me to describe it is that I tell people all the time, I don't do well at resting. right? And so the worst thing you can say usually to someone who is truly at that place of burnout is, well, just stop doing stuff, or just stop it, right? Sitting and doing nothing for me will not do anything. Just saying, well, sleep more. That doesn't do anything, right? So I have to have a recovery plan. I actually think most people are this way. You can't just say, I want to recover. How do I avoid it? To have a recovery plan. For me, a recovery plan has things that help me feel a little bit better. Because remember, one of the dangers is you're looking for things that are going to make you feel a lot better.
Right.
So what's something makes you feel a little bit better? So if it makes you feel a lot better, it might not be good. So a little bit better. What are things that fill me up? And what are the things that actually drain me? I need to know the difference of those. And then what are actions constantly that I'm taking, even on a weekly basis? So like a little bit better for me, that's like listening to music, or taking a short walk, or having a cup of tea, or intense exercise, reading. So that doesn't have to be yours, but I mean, like, these are things that I know help me feel a little bit better. And then what are things that fill me? Well, time with mentors and leaders, like talking with you, where I'm learning and being challenged by questions, or journaling, I know adds energy, where I'm thinking and writing my thoughts so I can look at them outside of me and twist them around. And then things that drain me. My team always laughs. Mediocre people is number one on my list. Someone that just, they don't want to grow. They want to complain. They don't want to learn. They're not teachable. Yard work. Until the pandemic, haircuts. It's like complete waste of time and energy. I hate getting hair. Now I'm so grateful to be able to go get a haircut, right?
Interesting.
After the shelter in place orders. Going to doctors, social networking, those are all drains. So some of those things have to be done. So knowing that that's part of my plan each week in recovery, if I'm having things that are draining me, how am I going to do things that are adding energy? And then weekly actions, an hour for exercise, I limit social media, limit email, scheduling time for fun. It's not, oh, I need more. I have to schedule that. So I tell people all the time, I work at resting. That's the way I have to kind of think about it in terms of that recovery. I can't just say, okay, I'm going to get better at all these other things. No, here's a plan that I'm going to work at. I'm going to bring this strength that I have for drive, but I'm going to apply that drive to things that heal me and grow me. And my confession to you at 43 years old, after a 10-year journey of this now, is that most days, all of that still feels selfish. And that's one of the hardest things that I've had to identify and overcome, is that even if it feels selfish to devote an hour on my own to exercise every day, I'm not doing that just for me. I'm doing that to be able and capable to handle the stresses of life that come at me, so I can love and serve other people. The most selfish thing I can do is not recover, not deal with these things, not grow stronger, because then I'm not capable of loving others well, serving others well. Does that make sense?
It does. It's so interesting too to think of that in a selfish way, because on the outside looking in, it's like, yeah, that's normal human behavior. You should be doing these things if it's good. But all the things you mentioned are not something you should feel selfish about. The selfish things would be go out and, buy that bottle of whiskey because it makes you feel good, or go to that movie that you shouldn't go to because it makes you feel good, or fill in the blank. Those big things that give you a big push. You're like, yes, I'm good to go now. It's much more difficult, from what you're saying, to do the small things, the little things that can give you that boost. And also, you can do some of those things with your family too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, building those relationships. So it sounds like you're saying having an intentional self-care plan is important, not only for recovery, but for mitigation as well. So it's all kind of encapsulated into one thing, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, I think that you're right. You've got to, how do you heal from this challenge, and then how do you avoid it in the future? I think that what you just said, if I could add one point to what you just said,
Sure.
You said, shouldn't feel selfish. about it. I think that it's not a should or shouldn't, that you may ultimately feel that I don't have time for exercise because I have these people depending on me. I don't have time or money to learn and make changes to my nutrition. And I'm only one of a family of 5, and they're all going to eat other ways too. That seems selfish, right? So for me, what I had to kind of learn was that my feelings aren't necessarily true on this, that it's not that the motivation why I'm doing it isn't solely for me to feel better. It's for me to live better. And I think in Scripture, we can see that, particularly in the life of Christ, where he was open about tremendous pressures and expectations that came against him. He said in Luke, I have a baptism to undergo, and how stressed, how syneko was the Greek word there, pressed in, distressed, pulled apart I am until it's accomplished. In Luke 5, it says Jesus himself would often slip away to the wilderness and pray. Think about that. Mm-hmm. He's able to heal people. He's teaching people. All he just slip away, go pray. Seems rather selfish when I have my child here that could be healed for all this work that we could do. It says in Mark, he was in the stern of the boat asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, right. Teacher, do you not even care that we're perishing? You're sleeping while we're in this storm. That had to have looked selfish, right? And then perceiving that they were intending to come take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. So I had to really look and see that there's these behaviors. He was operating on a different set of standards and responses to these things pulling that externally may have really looked selfish to others.
That's a very, very intriguing perception of another challenge. People may look at what I'm doing that I need to do for self-care and see it as selfish as well.
Or question all kinds of motivations you might have, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
So one thing people talk about in life, in stressful situations, is this buzzword resilience.
Yeah.
Can you tell me, in your experience, what is resilience? Is it something I can learn? Is it something I need? What is resilience, and how do I get it if I don't already have it?
That's an awesome thing to think about. So one of the things I learned along the way is, again, stress is this word, very commonly used word. There's actually 2 things. There's stress that comes against you, pressures you, strains you, often can be seen as negative. And then there's another word we don't use very often at all called eustress, eustress. Eustress is a stress that is fundamentally healthy and helping you. So exercising would be an example of eustress. You're putting your body under stress and strain, and you can do it improperly and stress and strain and create a major problem. But ultimately, most exercise done well, training, is eustress. So I think what I see when I look at our culture around us right now as it's going through one, not arguably, the most significant challenge to our generation. Sure. I've never seen in anyone's lifetime.
Sure.
This is the challenge of difficult times. And so difficult times, when they come into your life, expose or can expose areas that we can grow. And instead, what many people are doing, understandably, is it's just hard. It's just difficult. They're struggling. But I think that all of us have faced that. But wisdom and growth is to say, Lord, what are you teaching me? What are the gaps? I didn't know. My spiritual disciplines aren't as strong as I thought, right? My trust in you feels weaker. I'm not as strong physically as I thought. I don't have the discipline in my eating that I thought. I don't have the energy that I thought I had for the intense emotions that are coming, right? That's not because there's something wrong with you that you didn't realize. It's that the challenges are so much more significant, and it's showing you these gaps. So it's how you respond under pressure that reveals your level of preparation. And that's nothing to be ashamed about. But, anyone can operate with a level of stability and health and love and grace in a normal day. It's how do we react when the pressure that we didn't expect or that feels far beyond us, that's what refines us. And we know that in the economy of God, as a Christian, I can say, we know God's always got the same desire for us individually, which is he's trying to grow and shape us into the image of his son.
Yes.
So the suffering that we've chased these struggles. So when you talk about resilience, I believe absolutely it can be learned, because his desire is to complete what he's begun in us. And so when we feel those gaps, it's, Lord, I don't want to have to go through this. I don't want to be under this kind of pressure, but I am. And I turn to Paul and look at when he gives his whole litany of dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, 3 times shipwrecked, despairing of life, right? We considers ourselves even dead, that under a sentence of death he talks about, right? And there are those times in life where those pressures are going to come. So the resilience is, as I go through these experiences, am I growing and changing and learning? And then in my normal daily life, when things aren't constantly like that, what's my level of training and preparation and growth in the best of times?
So with that, it's a great segue into my next question for you, which is, what are the resources you have used and would recommend to our listeners for either mitigation of burnout, or what are your resources?
Oh, man. To me, this is a lifestyle. So I'm constantly trying to learn and grow in this area and look at who can I learn from as well. A few that come to mind, though, immediately is a book that's sort of a classic in the alcoholism recovery world. I'm not an alcoholic or recovering alcoholic, but the book, The Way of Thinking, is profoundly helpful. It's called Codependent No More by Melody Beattie. So that book had a profound impact on me in terms of just realizing that there is cycles and systems and relationships that I am not seeing clearly, and dealing with that again. What's my motivation? Why does some of these things feel selfish? Why does me helping others in my family or no matter what, create a burnout? What's going on there? Another one is a book more for leaders, business leaders, but it's The Power of Full Engagement by Jim Layer and Tony Schwartz. That one gives for me, was a whole big picture of what does it look like to create a whole plan or lifestyle where you're managing your energy rather than your time. Younger Next Year by Chris Crowley, even though it's written for people in the second half of their life or even during retirement age, was profound in how I thought about nutrition and exercise being key to preparedness for stresses of life. And then last one, I hope this doesn't sound trite, brother, but it's really easy to quote scripture, to teach and learn and read scripture. But the most fundamental thing that I missed for years was learning to examine scripture as not just an intellectual reading or spiritual or ethereal thing, but looking at the physical behaviors involved. So if you look, what did Jesus physically do? Not just what did he say, or what miracle, what did he physically do with his time? Looking at Paul's descriptions and how physical his language is, realizing that you can't take communion as an example. You can't remember the Lord's Supper. That can't be done intellectually or in your head. Imagine you have to physically eat the bread, physically drink the wine, baptism, you've got to physically get wet, right? Learning to look at scripture that way really helped me, because I think a lot of these things were in my head rather than changing my actual actions and behaviors. So those are a few sources.
That's one crazy thing about scripture to me, and it doesn't feel trite at all, is the more I get to know people, the way they look at scripture is completely different in a lot of ways. And while you're noticing actions, someone else is noticing, where they went, and another person is really intrigued by the numbers of people that were here and there, and
the depth of his word.
It's endless, and you can study it a lot of different ways. One more question for you. Oh, go ahead. I
was gonna just give one more piece of detail on that, because when you said resources, I immediately jumped to like books or things that were impactful for me, but a few just very practical things that are deceptively simple. One would be, have a recovery plan, and it can just be as simple as writing the things that are healthy and helpful for you. Training, nutrition, zero sugar, or limiting it. Those would be things that, if you're just looking for a quick, practical, sharing emotions I may not understand yet. I never really saw myself as a man who couldn't talk about his emotions, but what I found is by the time I was talking about them, I was I'd had enough. I was sort of like at that wall.
Sure.
And so to realize that the reason I wasn't talking about emotions, sometimes I didn't even understand them. So to be able to say to my wife, or even a close, trusted friend, hey, let me just talk about some of the things I'm trying to process. I don't even understand what's going on. That was key. And then sharing my thoughts with someone just to have them known. And for me, that's my wife. I would encourage you, if you're not married, it needs to be someone extremely safe that's not of the opposite sex.
Sure.
But to be able to say, hey, I just need to know that someone on the planet, I've said this so many times to my wife, I just need to know that someone on the planet has heard me kind of talk about what I'm thinking here. I don't need a thought or reaction or advice, just need to be for you to know. And then you mentioned journaling, writing out my thoughts, prayers, gratefulness, those sorts of things that are nothing new, but try living it every day for years. That's the challenge.
Sure.
Right?
No, thank you for bringing us back to that, because those are perfect next steps. We really like to, as much as possible, leave people with on the episode some next steps, and they can get some of that. You guys that are listening in can get some of those, the journaling or sharing in a safe place with Grace Story over the community page. Just subscribe at gracestoryministries.com. Zach, I want to leave with one question. If you could tell our listeners just one thing about what we've talked today, something you want them to really remember, what would that be?
I would say that it's hard to overestimate or overstate how limited our control and influence really is over the external powers of the world, and how they come against us as individuals. Really hard to overstate or exaggerate that. But I would say, I think it's also, and I've found this to be true, it's also completely impossible to overstate the grace that God can give us as we identify and take steps that bring our thoughts and our emotions and our bodies into alignment with Him, and then doing the next wise thing. And I just can't overstate God's grace in that moment of, despite how I feel, I'm going to move and I'm going to do the next wise thing. And that's going to move me forward in this battle, or it's going to move me forward in the recovery from the battle.
Wow. I love that. You've said a lot of things, and we've said it a couple times on this episode already, that we could spend a lot of time on this or that. I think we're going to need to have you back on a future episode to break down some of these things. It sounds like we've just done an overview of burnout and mitigation of burnout and self-care.
I have to give you all the credit on that, Nate. You've asked such huge questions. So it's a blessing that you would think there's some value here. I hope there is to others, but leave it to you to ask great questions. Pick a topic last time that I don't have as much passion for, or maybe one that I haven't made so many mistakes in, and that could be shorter. So,
well, it sounds like we'll have you back, and thank you so much for coming on this episode. We really do appreciate it. And of course, we want to say a big thank you to each of you who are listening in today. We hope that you'll tune in again in a couple of weeks. We're going to have Madeline Chesney. She's a doctorate of nursing practice coming on the show, and she's going to be talking to us about resilience in healthcare for healthcare workers. So we hope that you'll tune in then. And again, head on over to that webpage, GraceStoryMinistries.com, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.